Today's story will hopefully leave you baffled because they might sound fake and quite unreal, but they are very much true. And also, story 3, you want to stay for that because, well, let's say it's just downright horrifying. And of course, and you'll see why. And after watching it, you'll agree with me. And so, once you get to story 3 and watch it and do agree, all I ask you to do is to comment down below, agree, nothing else. But with all that being said, let's begin. The date is December 2nd, 1942, and well, if you know the basics of history, you know what time this is. It's the middle of World War II, and so the Polish army were sent out to Iran, where they were going to try to invade the country. A group of Polish soldiers, known as the Polish 22nd Artillery Supply Company, were in the mountains of Iran, and as they were going through this mountainous area, they would stumble across a village, where it was quite desolated, but still there were a couple of homes that people lived in. And usually when soldiers go through these towns and other populated places, they would try to trade their valuables in exchange for food and other valuables, etc. But there would be a couple of soldiers that would go up to a group of men that lived in the village, and so as they were walking up to these men in hopes of exchanging their valuables for food, and these men that they were walking up to were sitting on a bench, and as they looked at these soldiers coming towards them, just really before they can greet them, the Polish soldiers would see something come up from behind these people that would instantly stick with them. Of course, intrigued, they would ask the villagers that, how is it staying with you, and how did you even find it in the first place? And the villagers would reply, we don't know, we just found it walking next to a toddler and we decided to take it in, but we're not really looking to keep the thing, so if you want to exchange some knives or some food, we'll happily do it. So all the soldiers would look at each other, but just before they can make a decision, they would walk up to this thing to see if it was friendly, and to their absolute surprise, it was really friendly, and in fact it actually took a liking to the soldiers. Now seeing this, of course, the soldiers were quite keen on keeping this, so they said, why the hell not, we'll take him. Now of course you're wondering, what did they ultimately exchange their valuable food and knives for? And well, it was a Siberian brown bear cub. Now the men would basically go on the rest of the trip with this cub, and at first the bear would have problems trying to eat food and just swallow it, and so to counteract that, the soldiers would basically feed him milk, or condensed milk from an old vodka bottle, which would actually work. And this cub, since it was really young, would pick up the habits of the soldiers, such as drinking alcohol, smoking, drinking coffee in the morning, and every time that the soldiers had a campfire, you best believe that you were going to expect the cub at the campfire and also having a lot of fun. And also during the off time, the soldiers and the bear would often wrestle with each other to really see who was stronger, which of course the bear would win all of them. But either way, it was fun for the group. Now of course the bear did have a name, and it was Wojtek, and eventually he'd be so accustomed to the humans around him that he would eventually learn how to march like a soldier, salute like a soldier, and just become into a human-like bear. Now some time would pass and the supply company would be reassigned to fight alongside the British army. So as the team got ready and eventually started to board on the ship to head to Italy, which was where they needed to go, they found out that this ship doesn't allow mascots or pets to be on board. But instead of feeling sad and letting go of Mr. Wojtek, they would instead get around this restriction by actually enlisting him as a real soldier, with his own paybook, his own rank, and his own serial number. He would go on to live with the men in the tents, or have his own special wooden crate, which would be transported by truck. During his first battle, Wojtek would see the men carrying these massive 100-pound boxes of ammunition, and so as he's watching them, he decided to start mimicking them by also carrying these massive 100-pound boxes of ammunition. And of course this would help the unit to convey ammunition. Since he was a bear, you'd think that he'd make mistakes. Well, you'd be wrong, because he wouldn't make any mistakes. He would be quite flawless in his job. And just to give you a reference, these boxes that the men carried would require 4 men to carry one box, but since Wojtek was this strong bear, it would only take one of him to lift one box up. Eventually, after many battles, Wojtek would actually be promoted to a corporal, and in popularity to his name, and also the fact that he was a bear, a picture of a bear carrying an artillery shell was adopted as the official emblem of the 22nd Company. And at the end of World War II, after fighting many battles, Wojtek was transported to Buckinghamshire, Scotland, where the rest of his company would be as well. And eventually when the company split, Wojtek was given to Edinburgh Zoo, where eventually he would spend the rest of his life there. And on December 2nd, 1963, aged 21 and weighing nearly 500 kg, and also standing over 6 feet tall, Wojtek would pass away. On January 15th, 1919, this day was quite ordinary apart from the fact that it was past the 40 degrees Celsius mark. And even so, the company of Purity Distilling had their doors open for their workers to come into work. And this company would have their main base at Boston, where they would have this large 2.3 million gallon storage tank of molasses, which for more detail would be about 13,000 short tons. And it was situated in ethanol plant, which was also situated quite far away from the main building. The process goes, the molasses would be offloaded from the ships that would carry it, and then it would get stored away until later it get transferred via pipeline to the Purity ethanol plant. The molasses tank stood about 50 feet in height and about 90 feet in diameter. And if you don't know what molasses is, it's basically something that can be fermented into ethanol. And if you don't know what ethanol is or what it's used for, and well, it was used as the main ingredient for alcohol and alcoholic beverages. But either way, January 15th, the worker would get up and get ready. And of course, as he's getting ready, we'll notice the astronomically hot weather. But either way, he had bills to pay, so he would head to work. He works at the Purity Distilling Company. So once he arrived, he would just begin to work and do his daily jobs, until at one point, as he was working, he would suddenly feel the ground shaking. And so as he's looking around, as the ground's slowly shaking and then slowly getting faster and faster, he would hear this massive bang that sounded like a thunderclap. And so once he heard this thunderclap, it would be accompanied by like what sounded like a machine gun, as something was clearly shooting out of something. And as he's trying to decipher what this was and why the hell the ground was shaking, he would be met with something else. Literally just a second later, he would be pushed off from the ground and swept off his feet due to the massive force that came over him. And now basically he's essentially flying backwards. And as he's now flying, he would look over to his left. And as he's looking towards his left, trying to see what's going on, he would see that there was a truck flying past him that also had been flung away due to this massive force. Along with that was a rush of sweet smelling air. And once he had smelled this as he's flying away, he knew something bad had happened. Because as soon as this truck landed onto the ground, this massive wave of molasses about 25 feet high and moving about 35 miles per hour was coming towards him. And this massive wave of molasses was due to the fact that the other day, a ship had previously delivered a fresh batch of molasses. And when fresh supplies of molasses comes in, they would warm it up to boiling temperatures to reduce its viscosity for transfer. And once inside of the tank, that molasses the next day of January 15th, when Boston was having again one of its warmest days. And due to the thermal expansion of the older and colder molasses that was inside the tank, mixed in with the newer and warmer molasses, which would essentially turn this 2.3 million gallon molasses holder to a ticking time bomb which would explode. Altogether, here is where the molasses would actually cover the city of Boston. And as you can see, it might look small, but you gotta remember that this molasses was about waist deep, and it was sticky and it was horrible. And once you got stuck in it, which unfortunately many people did, it was really hard to get out from. And actually, some people actually lost their own lives because of it. About 150 people were injured and about 21 people actually died, and several horses died as well. Some crushed and some drowned by the molasses or the debris that was carried within. For example, there was a man named Anthony who was walking his little sister back home from a nearby school and would be hit by the wave and would be carried literally all the way to the middle of the city, which was really far away. And the worst part was, once Anthony was done surfing on this molasses wave, then been engulfed by it, he would find himself with his throat clogged with molasses and would pass out. He would be found by his mother and sister, and he would actually survive, but would have a really bad throat because of this. During the late 1980s, a 35-year-old man named Ivan Maguire had become into this very experienced skydiving instructor. And by the year of 1988, he had over 700 jumps to his name. And on that same year, April 5th, he was working in North Carolina and was instructed to film some instructors with their students after they jumped out of the plane. Now, if you're confused on how this worked, it's basically when Mr. Recording, aka Mr. Ivan, would go up to the plane with the instructor and student. And so once they were in the right altitude, the recorder would jump out first and then would leap on their back. So basically they were facing upwards at the plane. And once he flipped over and was ready, the instructor and student would jump out. And Ivan would record them until they pulled their parachute out, which was his cue to pull his parachute out. And now, since it was the 1980s, the film equipment wasn't like anything we have today. It was much larger and again much bigger and needed a lot of preparation. On his helmet was a voice activated camera that he would use as well. And then there was a cord going to this big heavy VHS deck that he kept in his backpack. But despite this hassle of the equipment, Ivan would jump first, and then he would film the instructor and student session in the air. And then eventually when Ivan landed, he would go to the riggers where he would give his parachute so they can repack it up. And so once that was taken care of, he would walk over to the benches and would begin to mess around with his camera equipment. And two older other employees that were nearby him could instantly tell that he was annoyed at this camera equipment. And that was mainly due to the fact that it was set up in a weird way and that required it to be adjusted all the time. But as he was doing that, eventually the time for the second jump of the day with a new instructor and new student had arrived. And so now he's so preoccupied on this VHS deck, but eventually realizes that the two are waiting for him. So he quickly gets everything ready, grabs his camera bag, and would run over to the plane where everyone was waiting for him. And just before the plane was about to take off, the instructor quickly pointed out that Ivan forgot his parachute, which then Ivan checked, and when he realized that he actually did, his face went blue. And so he quickly apologized and ran back and got his parachute. So now finally with everything, the three would fly to the normal altitude of jumping and then jump out, film, and everything went great. Once landed the successful jump, just like the first jump, Ivan would hand his parachute to the riggers and then go over to the bench, sit back down and begin to fiddle with his camera once again. And after some time, the third jump with a new student and new instructor would arrive. So again, preoccupied, he would be late once again. And so rushing, he grabs his parachute and then rushes towards the plane. Once in the plane, he would make small talk with the instructor and student before eventually they got to the jumping altitude, which if you don't know was 10,500 feet. And Ivan would turn on his camera and the footage shows that the instructor and student were kind of getting their gear ready across from him in the plane. Now once everything and everyone was ready, the jump master towards the front of the plane slides open the side door, and since Ivan was going to be the first to jump, he would make his way over to the edge. Then once at the edge, he would turn himself backwards so his back was facing outside of the plane, and then he would make sure that the instructor and student were right on top of him so they can jump right afterwards. And once everyone was ready, Ivan would let go of the handles and Ivan would begin to fall backwards while continuing to film. As he's falling, you can clearly see the instructor and student jump right afterwards, and Ivan would continue to film them as they were going down. And so 3 seconds in free fall, the instructor and student will pull their parachute, which then Ivan knows that's his cue to pull his parachute. And so as he reaches over to the line to pull the parachute open while holding the camera on the other hand, he realizes that he can't find the line, which was strange and scary as he kept looking for the line. So as he's got his right hand preoccupied, desperately trying to find this line, he could never find it. And that's when he realizes what happened. That parachute that he grabbed before he loaded up in the plane was not a parachute. He grabbed his heavy backpack which had the VHS decking, and when he put it on, he mistook it for his parachute. Now free falling in terminal velocity with no way to stop himself, he would begin to start yelling, "Oh no," and he's still reaching back, hoping that magically this line would reappear. But again, there was nothing there. And after a few horrible seconds, you can see the ground coming closer and closer, and then it would come out. Ivan's body was found 1.5 miles outside of the drop zone in the woods. His camera and videotape was severely damaged, but they were able to put it together, and that's why we know what happened in his final moments. An investigation into his death shows that the pilot had also made the same mistake as Ivan, because when he saw Ivan with his backpack on, he thought that it was a parachute. So ultimately, Ivan's death was ruled as an accident. Fair warning, if you look into this case, you will definitely come across Ivan's video of his final moments in the sky. So that will be it for today's video. Comment below if any of these stories shocked you. But with all that being said, if true crime stories intrigue your interest, then I would highly suggest you subscribe to our YouTube channel, as that's all I do and I upload once a week. But with all that being said, I thank you for watching, and yeah, goodbye.